It's 7 weeks today since Italy locked down, but from next Monday, some restrictions will start to be lifted. Well, let's join Ros Atkins, who's been looking at this for us. Hi, Ros.
Hi, Lewis. Yes, let's update you on Italy and on a number of other European countries as well. Starting with the Italians, they're gradually easing their lockdown. From next week, parks, factories and building sites are reopening and funerals will resume. Schools, though, must wait until September. Here are the latest statistics in Italy. There are almost 200,000 recorded cases now and almost 27,000 deaths. That's the highest recorded toll in Europe. But if there is some hope, it's that the new number of cases is at its lowest since the 10th of March and the number of people in intensive care has dropped too. Here's Mark Lowen in Rome.
Europe's first lockdown is now set to ease in a week's time. There is a roadmap to reopening that the Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte laid out. So from Monday the 4th of May, a week from now, takeaway will be offered at bars and restaurants. They will be able to swing back into action for that service. Parks will reopen. People will be able to exercise again outdoors. They'll be able to move within their own region. They'll be able to visit family and relatives, but wearing masks and no large social gatherings will be allowed. Athletes will be able to train again on their own. People will be able to attend funerals again, although there'll be a maximum capacity of 15 people at funerals, and they will all have to wear masks. Manufacturing and construction and wholesale companies will be allowed to restart activity. Then 2 weeks after that, so May the 18th, is the date that libraries and museums will be allowed to reopen. Sports teams will be able to practice on their own again. Smaller construction companies also will be allowed to restart. And then from the 1st of June, well, that is the date planned at the moment for restaurants, bars, cafes, hairdressers and beauty salons to reopen. Schools, though, will remain shut until September. So this is an attempt by the Italian government to tell people that their sacrifices are paying off.
Next to Germany, it's now compulsory to wear a face mask there if you're on public transport and in most shops. Here, as you can see, masks are being handed out to people who are using public transport. This is in Frankfurt. Germany is now following on from Austria, Poland and the Czech Republic in making mask wearing mandatory. Now, Germany has a reported death toll of close to 6,000. So that's significantly lower than Italy, France, the UK and Spain. In Spain, there have been more than 23,000 confirmed virus-related deaths. And again, there is some better news in Spain. The number of daily fatalities is falling. And over the weekend, children under 14 were allowed out of their homes for the first time in 6 weeks. And a further easing on exercise restrictions is coming too. Here's Richard Preston.
Spain has had one of Europe's strictest lockdowns. Now, those restrictions are easing. Over the weekend, children under the age of 14 were allowed to leave their homes for the first time in 6 weeks. They're now allowed outside for an hour a day. But parks remain closed and schools shut. The rate of infections in Spain is on the way down. If that continues, the Prime Minister says restrictions here will be relaxed even more.
So we've heard from Italy, Germany and Spain. Next to Switzerland, it's also easing its lockdown. Here's Imogen Fuchs in Bern.
People here have been only really able to go out and buy essential supermarkets, food stores for the last 6 weeks, and nothing else that we're used to doing in our daily lives. Everybody's been working from home. So it's a first tiny step towards easing Switzerland's lockdown, but the government said it's going to take this very, very gradually. Schools will not open till the May 11th. Bigger shops, non-food shops, June 8th. No date for cafes and restaurants. So we're all going to be looking a little bit longingly towards Italy, because it sounds like their bars and restaurants are going to be open before ours. But of course, the borders remain closed. The assault on the health services, the overwhelmed health services, did not quite materialise.
Next to Sweden, where the government's pushing back at the idea that it's not taking this pandemic seriously. As I'm sure you know, there's no official lockdown in Sweden, but the vast majority of people have been voluntarily social distancing. Now, Sweden has a population of just over 10 million and more than 2,000 reported COVID-19 deaths, Compare that with Denmark and Norway, which have roughly populations of half the size and death tolls of just over 400 and just over 200 respectively. While the Swedish government is continuing to insist that its plans do make sense in the long term, have a listen to its foreign minister.
We think that everybody has to be prepared that it could be a long time. That's also why we don't have, for example, a lockdown in Sweden. We think this is a marathon, it's not a sprinter. So that's why we want people, for example, to be able to go out, not be locked in their homes, as long as they keep the social distancing. We think in Sweden this is the way to keep also the long-term public health.
Well, for more on the Swedish government's approach, let's hear from Maddie Savage, who's in Stockholm.
The fact that Swedes can still go out to bars and restaurants has captured global attention in recent weeks because Swedes are living in a very different way to much of the world where there are much stricter rules and lockdowns in place. Swedish ministers have strongly defended the strategy here. They say it's all about long-term voluntary measures that can last, in contrast to what's happened in countries with lockdowns where people are now trying to figure out a way out of them. The Minister for Business said it was important to mitigate the effects of the coronavirus on the economy, while at the same time working to prevent the spread of the infection within society. He pointed out that places that weren't encouraging social distancing are being closed down. 5 restaurants and bars closed here in the Swedish capital over the weekend. And he said it was important to note that many places here are also suffering. In some tourist hotspots, demand for hotels and restaurants is down by 90%. And there are worries here about how the economy will be impacted. The strategy here, though, continues to be debated. While some people think it will help the economy in the long run, there are others that still believe stricter measures should have been introduced and that could have helped to save more lives.
One other thing to show you from Sweden, its chief epidemiologist has been featured in a tattoo. Here's Anders Tegnell. He's become very much the public face of Sweden's fight against the pandemic. And, well, this man decided to get that done. The tattoo artist apparently said he came up with the idea because he believed in the Swedish strategy to minimise disruption to social and economic life. And evidently the customer wants to go along with that and will now have many years to reflect on the merits of the Swedish strategy. Lewis, you tempted?
No thanks. Let's turn to Latin America now. And El Salvador's president says criminal gangs are taking advantage of the coronavirus pandemic. More than 50 people have been killed in 3 days of violence in the tiny Central American country. Nearly half of the deaths were reported on Friday. President Nayib Bukele has sent a warning on Twitter. We're going to ensure that the gang members who committed these murders are going to regret that decision their entire lives. He's authorised the police and the army to use lethal force against gangs. And he's also informed prison staff to do this: transfer members of rival gangs from their own cells together into a jailhouse. This video was released by the government. There are more than 12,000 gang members inside El Salvador's jails. Putting rival members together is supposed to limit their ability to plan attacks. Here's the security minister, Osiris Luna.
Y no van a ver ningún rayo del sol.
They will not receive sunlight. They will be in total confinement 24 hours a day in the 7 maximum security prisons that there are in this country. This was an order from President Nayib Bukele. We are complying with that order.
Well, El Salvador's prisons are overcrowded and social distancing is almost impossible. These pictures are the evidence. The BBC published the work of a photographer who gained rare access inside the jails before the coronavirus outbreak. Prisoners are crammed into small cells and poor medical facilities mean a COVID-19 outbreak could spread quickly. El Salvador is one of the most dangerous places in the world. The statistics are well documented. At its peak, El Salvador was reporting more than 17 murders a day and earned the reputation as the murder capital of the world. There's plenty more evidence to back that up. This ABC article from 2016 reports 1 murder every hour in the first 3 months of the year. In one of its deadliest days, the country recorded 43 deaths. And The Guardian reports even in Iraq, with its civil war, suicide bombings and attacks, it couldn't match those statistics. A surge in the murder rate was put down to a breakdown between the government and gangs. When violence is such a part of everyday life, a rare day without one killing is a reason for celebration. We spotted this story in the UK's Independent last year, which reports its first day without a murder for 2 years and just 8 murder-free days in 19 years. The numbers, though, are going down. Last month, the murder rate fell to 2.1 murders a day, and President Nayib Bukele, who took office in June last year, claims much of the credit for that drop. Well, let's chat to our Central America correspondent, Will Grant. Will, so much to pick through there. Let's start with this idea that the gangs are taking advantage of the coronavirus pandemic to go out and increase killings and continue their criminal activity. Is that what is happening?
Well, certainly if the President Nayib Bukele is to be believed, that was the sort of cause of this recent spike in murders. We saw this number 22 just on the past Friday. And the reason they've put the leaders of these groups, Maras, the two main ones, the Mara 18, the Barrio 18 is one of the main ones, and the other one is the Mara Salvatrucha. The reason they've put them in the same cells, put them under pressure, not a single ray of sunshine, as we heard there in the clip from the prisons director, is so that the leadership of these gangs can't send messages to the outside world, which apparently, according to people I've been speaking to in El Salvador today, that was going on. And that's why things were going on outside, that they were perhaps taking advantage of the situation, the different security set up outside, and the fact that they're not able to extort businesses if businesses are shuttered. So they're feeling sort of a lot of pressure as gangs, and it's created this sort of strange and obviously terrible spike in violence just at the end of last week.
And Will, we can see these pictures, extraordinarily cramped conditions. Lots of countries around the world are actually releasing prisoners to try and free up some space. That clearly isn't going to happen here. And so the risk of a spread of COVID-19 goes up.
Yes, I mean, I think that's definitely one part of the reason the human rights organisations are aghast at those pictures. And you can see why, can't you? Men being kind of ferried from cell to cell, all of their heads shaved under, very, very questionable human rights situations in El Salvador prisons at the best of times. And certainly this is far from the best of times. So real concern, I think, from a human rights perspective about what all this means. If you look at the comments on Twitter under the president's own Twitter account or under the Twitter account of the head of prisons, it's by and large positive. People in El Salvador are tired at the years of violence, the impunity for these gang members, these Mara leaders, and they applaud these steps. But I think that's based on exhaustion at the violence that's involved, rather than the fact that it is so questionable in terms of the human rights of them as prisoners.
Yeah, extraordinary story. Thanks for that, Will. Well, let's see what else is happening around the world now. And some good news in New Zealand. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the coronavirus has, in effect, been eliminated. The country recorded fewer than 1,500 cases during the pandemic, with 19 deaths. Ms Ardern said there's currently no more community transmission of the virus, but believes people should still be cautious. Well, so why has New Zealand been so successful? Dr. Kate Baddock is the chair of the New Zealand Medical Association, gives us her theories.
I think the reason that we were so effective in this is that we had an empathetic Prime Minister and we had a believable Director General of Health who was the face of managing the COVID for the country. As I'm sure you're aware, New Zealanders are not naturally compliant, but we've been compelled by the evidence and we've been persuaded by the experts. And then we've been touched by the humanity of our Prime Minister, and so we have complied. We have agreed to do what was asked of us in order to eradicate the virus, and as such we've been successful.
Well, let's turn from New Zealand to neighbouring Australia, where the rise in infections has also slowed considerably in recent weeks. And on Sunday, there were only 16 new cases recorded. Much like in New Zealand, its government has been praised for its response to the crisis. Restrictions are now being eased in some states, and some larger outdoor gatherings will be allowed this week.